Good morning, everybody. This past week we had a few really nice days outside, so I decided to take out my bike out of storage and go for a couple of rides. So the first time, this was a few days ago, I went south and west of LaPorte a little bit. By the time I got back to the church here, the odometer said I went 30 miles. Felt great right after I got off. But there was a problem. I hadn't ridden my bike in about 6 months, and I would notice it in just a little bit. So I have in my basement this trainer that you can connect your bike to, and it basically serves as a stationary bike for many months, so you can use it inside during the winter. Well, I was lazy. I did not set that up. So this whole winter, I was not on my bike at all. What happens when you're not used to riding your bike, and all of a sudden, after 6 months, you decide to get on it? Well, on my bike, I have this narrow seat, which is rather uncomfortable to sit on for a while. I have to contort my body for about 2 hours, leaning forward as a cyclist does. Things I was not doing on a normal basis. And you can guess it, I was feeling it that evening and the next day and the next day. Didn't feel good because I was not in the habit of doing that. The ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle said that anyone who wants to lead a good life must be able to change and form habits. This could refer to physical habits like getting into the habit of riding your bike regularly. But it also has to do with moral habits, like the way that we treat others, the way that we treat ourselves. So when you repeat habits over and over and over again, then according to Aristotle, these form what we call virtues. And when you practice virtue repeatedly, then it becomes second nature. It becomes automatic. You just don't think about it anymore. There's less effort required. I had a music teacher that used to say all the time, practice doesn't make perfect, practice makes permanent. You can perfect virtue, but you can also perfect the opposite, which is vice. You can repeat good habits that become natural to you, but you can also reinforce bad habits that just get normalized and you become used to. That's how addictions get started. They don't come from out of nowhere. They get regularly reinforced over time until they just become normal. So if I wake up every morning and I reach for that snooze button, and I do it the next day and I do it the following day, then I get into the habit of it. It becomes normal for me. I don't know any different. If I get home after a day at work and I just spend every night scrolling through my phone and watching YouTube videos, then it just becomes normal for me, and I don't think anything of it. If late at night before I go to bed, I decide to eat a big bowl of ice cream, which I would love to do every night, then that would become normal. It would just become second nature for me. So in my family, we have a little niece who just celebrated her first birthday. Up until now, she's been crawling all over the place, causing a ruckus, trying to stand up, but falling flat on her rear end every time. But just recently, yesterday, we were all cheering her on as she got up, took 1 step, took 2 steps, then 3, then 4, and then just ended up walking across the room. That didn't come from out of nowhere. That took lots of efforts, attempts of building those little muscles in those little legs. It's the same way when you and I tried to perfect a piece of music over and over again. When you're a pitcher and you're trying to perfect your fastball and get it in the strike zone, you have to do it over and over again. When you're getting on the bike and getting used to how it feels, it takes repeated actions to solidify that and perfect it. When you're not in the habit of doing those things, it shows, just like it showed for me not being on the bike in 6 months. Forming good habits, though, doesn't just have to do with sports or music or how we spend our time. It's especially relevant in the lifestyles that we live. So today, the 4th Sunday of Easter is called Good Shepherd Sunday. Gospel always comes from John chapter 10. When Jesus says, I am the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Think of the image of a shepherd, one who guards and protects the sheep. That's the job of the shepherd, to stay with the sheep. And the difference between a true shepherd and one who is simply hired for the job and is making money off of it and doesn't really care for the sheep is that when danger comes, that hired guy simply runs off, abandons the sheep to be devoured by the wolves. In contrast to that, the good shepherd stays by the sheep, stays put, doing whatever he can to protect them. With that in mind, the church today commemorates the World Day of Prayer for Vocations. You can see it on the cover of your bulletins. Today we look at how God has blessed us with vocations to the priesthood, to religious life, to marriage especially. And we're asking for an abundance of God's grace on our young people to strive for greatness in whatever the vocation is that God might be calling them to. Because all young people in this parish are being called to something great, whether it is priesthood or if it's religious life or for the majority, to be holy in their marriage. I want you to think of your own vocation. So for all of you who are married, think of all of the good habits that you have with your spouse. Maybe the things that you like to do together, things that you have repeated over time, the things that maybe your spouse likes about you and that you like about them. Now think about all the things that you do not like about your spouse. You could have gotten married just last week, or you could be married for over 50 years. And they may be the same things that you've been dealing with. Those habits that we build up over time. Now, they can be good habits, but they can also be bad habits. When we look at our own vocation and how Jesus has invited you and me to be shepherds, protecting those who he's placed under our care, spouses, our children, co-workers, our church communities, we can look at all of the ways that our habits that we reinforce over and over again, they can become virtues, but they can also become vices. We can get used to just dragging ourselves along and not giving our very best in our vocations. It can be a temptation for me too, as a priest, right? So I take the job of the shepherd very seriously because the word pastor is the Latin word for shepherd. So to be able to be present, to protect, to make sure that I know you all and that I'm there for you, I take seriously. But I can easily get into habits that would make me wander off. It's much easier to avoid this person or that person. It's much easier to not have to deal with this problem that I have on my desk, go do something I'd rather do. What does Jesus do, though? Jesus does that. That's what he does. As the good shepherd, he lays down his life for the sheep. And he shows us what it's like to be a shepherd like him. If you and I are going to be shepherds like the Lord, if we're going to inspire more young people to pursue vocations to the priesthood, to religious life, and especially to marriage, and to do it with greatness, then it demands something of you and me. It means a building up of those virtues, and to show those with a joyful lifestyle. I want to point out maybe 3 habits of the Good Shepherd that can help us in our own habits. First, we call Jesus the Good Shepherd because he cares for the sheep. Parents, when your kids need something or want something, do you say, wait a minute, while I go and feed myself? Or while I go and take care of myself in the bathroom? No, when that child is crying in the middle of the night, your instinct is to get up and move and take care of that. That's your shepherding instinct. When you get in the repeated routine of that, and you build the habit of that, of putting aside your own wishes to stay in bed and to have peace and quiet, then you're building up that internal strength of virtue to tend to those who need it. Jesus cares for the sheep. He knows them, and he's willing to do whatever is needed for them. Second habit is that Jesus goes after the sheep when they're lost, just like he comes after you and me. What happens when we have this going on in families? When there's headbutting, the easy temptation is to just distance. When there's conflict, we don't want to bring it up. Well, that gets reinforced over time. We start to build that bad habit that eventually separates us from one another. But what does Jesus do? He doesn't say, that one's run off, I'm just going to let him go. No, he leaves the rest of them, goes, grabs that sheep, confronts the sheep, throws it on his shoulder and says, I'm not going to lose you. We can build good habits of confronting those who are under our care and above our care. That's a good habit to imitate from the Good Shepherd. And of course, the last habit is Jesus, the Good Shepherd, lays down his life for the sheep. Jesus gave up everything, his own very life, so that you and I could have life in abundance. Shepherds get in the habit of laying down their lives for all of those who are under their care, and it becomes natural. That's the thing. When things can become natural for you, that's when you know that you've grasped that virtue. So when I get back on my bike, I imagine that throughout the year I'll have fewer aches and pains. You know why? Because I've built up that habit over time. It won't feel like this first time in 6 months that felt awful for the next few hours and days. I'm going to ask that all of us today, let's look at where God has called us. What's our vocation? How are we appreciating that? And let's form good habits in our own vocation so that, like the Good Shepherd, we can let virtue and self-sacrifice just become natural for us. Amen.